Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast, where I seek truth in the world's great books. I'm your host, Erik Rostad, coming to you from the beautiful Books of Titans studio in Franklin, Tennessee. My goal is to read 200 of the great books over the next 10 years and share what I'm learning. I'll talk a bit about each book, tie ideas together from a variety of genres, and share the one thing I always hope to remember from each of the great books. Today I'm going to cover the Odes by Pindar, using the translation by C.M. Bowra. This is book 9 for my 2024 reading list. Well, we're all familiar with the Olympic Games, and these odes were written to the athletes, about the athletes of the original Greek games. These odes are poems or choral songs that celebrate the victories of the athletes, but what Pindar would do is combine these praises of the athletes with mythological stories. And so he would kind of combine the two of these, the Greek gods and these athletes. And so he wrote 17 books during his life, and 4 of them remain. We lost the other 13, but we have 4 of them, and that's what's contained in these odes. And so he wrote songs about 4 different locations. And those locations are Olympia, Delphi, Noumea, and Corinth. And these are 4 areas that had these games. Pindar was born in 518 BC and he died in 438 BC. And I want to highlight a few things that are in the introduction by C.M. Bowra, and just about what this book deals with, what the structure of the poetry is, and things like that. So let me start off with the things that he deals with. Pindar deals with a great deal more than athletic success. So far as the actual games were concerned, he seems to have been not very interested in their details. What concerned him was the significance of success in his scheme of things. For him, victory in the games raised questions of mystical and metaphysical importance. It illustrated the fact of glory as something which came from the gods, and the reality of success which is won by proper use of natural gifts and laborious effort. And I'll stop the quote there. So you get the sense that this is, yes, it's about these athletes, but there's something a lot more. And so you actually learn a lot about mythology. You catch references to mythology throughout this book. Now for the structure of the poetry itself. C.M. Bowra says this: "This is a very demanding structure, and its demands are seen more clearly when we find that no poem of Pindar is metrically the same as the other. Each time that he composed a poem, he invented a new metrical pattern." I'm going to skip a little bit and then go right to the end. "It has no rival in variety, speed, and lightness." End quote. So apparently Pindar's poems in the original Greek are something to behold. Like they are excellent. They are difficult, but they are very well structured. And you heard me say that each one is a unique structure. So just in terms of the poetry itself, it's apparently just incredible. And of course we lose a lot of that in the English translation. So let me tell you a little bit about Pindar's world, or his vision of the world, and here is what Bowra says about that. "His vision is of a world in which both men and gods are active, but all that really matters comes directly from the gods." End quote. And then I want to highlight the main events that are captured in these odes, and these are the main events of the games of that time. So you had a chariot race, and a chariot race consisted of a chariot, obviously, but then 4 horses pulling that chariot, and they did laps that would equal about 9 miles. The next was mule car race, horse race, foot race, double foot race. So it's just a foot race was about 200 yards. A double foot race was there and back, so 400 yards. A long foot race, which was about 3 miles. So that would be about our 5K. And then race in armor, which is just awesome to think about. They're racing in full armor. And here it says the runner wore at least a helmet and carried a shield on his left arm. So maybe not full armor, but still, that would be pretty fun to watch. Wrestling, boxing, 5 events. So the pentathlon, which consisted of running, jumping, throwing the discus, throwing the javelin, and wrestling. Trial of strength. And then the last one, my favorite, flute. So yeah, so you envision these athletes just doing these, strenuous things like wrestling, and then the last one is flute playing. And that even one of the odes is in praise of the person who played the flute. So I love that idea. I think that's so interesting and just humorous in a way too. Like that all these athletic competitions, and then you've got one musical one thrown in there. Many of the Greeks thought Pindar to be their greatest lyrical poet. So C.M. Bowra is the translator, and what's interesting is he was at Oxford at the same time as C.S. Lewis. And so if you look up his bio online, you'll even see a comment he made about Lewis. I think that was on his Wikipedia page. So for initial reaction to the Odes, I had a very hard time with these. They are what came to my head was that they're written for like a master's degree level of understanding of Greek mythology. So there are so many references in here that you really have to have a strong basis in Greek mythology to appreciate, but then also just to understand what is going on. And C.M. Bowra had some great notes at the end of each of the odes, but even with that, I was lost a lot of the time. And so some of the other literature from Greece, I've found that I can kind of jump in with a very limited knowledge of Greek mythology, and I know I'm missing a lot, but I can at least understand what's going on. This one was like at a different level where you really had to have a strong basis in mythology to understand what was going on. It was a very interesting structure, so I appreciated that. I liked this idea of Pindar talking about the athletes and the gods and combining those two things together. I thought that was just a neat way of presenting the material, of trying to make these athletes immortal through song. So at the end, I would not put this on the great books list. I'm trying to keep like a very short great books list, and I'll have other books in there that I'm reading that kind of help in understanding or are ancillary books of some sort. And so I would put this book in that category as opposed to being one of the great books, especially reading this after reading the Iliad. The Iliad's just, to me, is on a different level. And again, I know I'm missing a lot not being able to read it in the original Greek, but as far as great books, with a limited, if I'm trying to keep it to just 200 great books, I don't think this one would make the final list. As for reading stats, I read this between April 1st and 6th of 2024. It's a 239-page book when you include the intro in there. And so it took me just a little under 5 hours to read, and that was over a six-day period. So the rest of this episode, just have a couple things I want to share in the next segment of some observations, some things I liked about the Odes. And then in the final segment, I'll cover my one thing, the one thing I'm still thinking about after having read Pindar's Odes. As I've been reading Greek literature this year, I've come across an idea quite often that there is immortality in song. There's immortality in poetry. There's immortality in being remembered, and being remembered through these myths, through these stories. And so you see this come up in the Iliad of men wanting to have renown, wanting to do well in battle so that their name lives on. And it worked. You know, it worked to some degree to where I'm reading the Iliad. I'm loving the Iliad. I'm learning about Achilles. I'm learning about Hector. I'm learning about these men who, in a way, reached immortality. I mean, how many names can we name from 2,000 years ago? They've reached a certain level of immortality in our mind, in our consciousness, in the stories we tell each other. These names still come up in movies. They come up in other books. So there's power in the remembrance of them, and there's power in these poems and these songs. In this case, in these odes. And so this is something that's highlighted in the introduction. So I want to read something quickly from there, and then go right to one of these odes and talk about how song is spoken of. And so here, this comes from the introduction. Through song, men attain immortality, even though this is not easily defined and seems to depend on being remembered by later generations. What Pindar conveys in song is precisely the enchantment of consciousness which his athletes enjoy in the moment of triumph. End quote. I love that aspect of the enchantment of consciousness which his athletes enjoy at the moment of triumph, and what Pindar is trying to do of making these athletes be remembered, tying them to the gods. And so let me give an example. And this is from the Nemean 7 ode. And this is for Sogenes of Aegina, winner in the boys' 5 events. So I'm going to read starting on line 9 from this ode. He dwells in the song-loving city of the Aeacidae, the spear strikers. They are glad to look after a heart well trained in the struggle. If any man's actions prosper, he strikes a honey-hearted well of the Muses' streams. Even high deeds of bravery have a great darkness if they lack song. We can hold a mirror to fine doings in one way only. If, with the help of memory in her glittering crown, recompense is found for labor in echoing words of song. And I'll stop reading it there. But this idea that there's immortality in song, that noble deeds can lead someone to singing about you and keeping your memory alive. And then you see that even high deeds of bravery have a great darkness if they lack song. So if there's no song about, even if you did a wonderful deed, if there's no song about it, it lacks. There's a great darkness about it. And then if with the help of memory, and memory is capitalized here, so it's the god memory, who's the mother of the Muses along with Zeus. So Zeus and memory, Mnemosyne, who's the god of memory, they have 9 muses, and so a honey-hearted well of the Muses' streams. So the muse inspiring these songs about these athletes. So this idea of memory being a part of that, of the Muses being a part of that, I just love that aspect. And then if we continue on a few lines in this same ode, we get this. But I hold that the name of Odysseus is more than his sufferings because of Homer's sweet singing. End quote. I love that. Odysseus, his story is full of suffering, but it's more than that because of Homer's sweet singing. The power of song, the power of mythology, the power of poetry to help us remember these things. I just love that idea. Another ode here that I want to highlight is one about, this one's Nemean 6, and this one talks about, it starts with talking about gods and men coming from the same source. And then, but they have different roles, but through these games and through other methods, there's this almost this way of like attaining to the gods. And so let me read this. Yet we can in greatness of mind or of body be like the immortals, though we know not to what goal, by day or in the nights, fate has written that we shall run. End quote. So in greatness of mind or in body, you can be like the immortals. So just kind of this striving or ways to attain to the immortal. And then let me close out this section just with an ode, and this is Olympian 8. And this one was so neat because it talked about the different generations that went to Troy. So the different generations of Greeks that went to Troy and fought against Troy. And there are 4 different generations, but this is the kind of thing where these odes take you deep into these myths. They take you deep into these stories and give you other insight. I'll highlight one thing that we only know from Pindar's Odes in segment 3, but yeah, you come across these odes like that where it's a story you're familiar with, or at least parts of it from the Iliad, and then they just kind of give a broader picture of the generations that went and fought against Troy. So I like to pull one thing from each book, and that's just something I've done for almost this entire reading project. And I've found that it helps me to remember a lot of things in a book. So if I try to remember a bunch of things, I won't remember any of them. If I try to remember one thing, I can usually recall that. And so just even seeing the book on my shelf, I can recall that one thing that stuck out to me about that book. And in turn, that will help me to remember other things in the book. So if it's like a productivity book, it's pretty obvious. There's kind of one thing that I'll try to implement in my life. For a book like this, it's just more, what's the thing that's still bouncing around in my head? And for this book, it's really this idea that you need to have a level of understanding of Greek mythology to go into some of these works of Greek literature. Now, you could just go right into the Iliad and you would miss a lot, but there's still a grand story there that even without knowing all the references and the deeper mythological stories and connections there, you could still get a lot out of the Iliad. And then as you learn more about the mythology that's contained outside of the Iliad, it just enhances your understanding, your enjoyment, and all that. This book, the Odes, was such a level higher than even the Iliad, just in terms of what you need to come in knowing about mythology. And I like to present the idea that book, anyone can just pick up these books and read them. But I was floored by this book in the sense that I could not understand a lot of it. And that really came from a lack of knowledge about Greek mythology. So one thing I've done is just in the last week is I've read it, but I have also now downloaded the audiobook of Edith Hamilton's Mythology. And my plan is just as I'm going on runs, as I'm driving, to just play that over and over so I can get these stories in my head. Because what she does is just collect all these stories, so you really get a good basis for the mythology that is the foundation for so many of these stories. I do want to highlight as part of this one thing I learned about Achilles, and this is something that is only found in Pindar's Odes. So we would not know this just from everything else that was lost at that time. We have this from here, and it's something that Achilles can do. That he killed deer without hounds or treacherous traps. By his feet he defeated them. What I tell was spoken by men of old. End quote. So Achilles was so fast that he could catch up to a deer. And I think I looked online and a deer can run like 36 or 38 miles per hour. So, this is a fast guy. And just the ability to kill a deer without any weapons, but just by being able to catch the deer and kill him with his hands. So he's fast enough to be able to do that. And just that little tidbit of information is so interesting. And I even saw it mentioned somewhere else when talking about Achilles. And so these are these little nuggets that you pick up about Greek mythology, and it enhances your understanding in this case of Achilles, and how all that comes together. And so I say all that, it's probably obvious to you, but just I'm coming to know more and more here as I go deeper into Greek literature, just how important that foundation of Greek mythology is to the understanding. So I'm reading the tragedies right now, and just there are so many references, and yes, there are notes that I can reference to, this is what this is referring to, but just to have that at your fingertips or just even in your mind already of like, this is kind of the backstory of this. This is why when this happens, this is so unique. This is so important. And so I would encourage you, if you're wanting to dig into Greek literature, to get that basis, get that foundation of Greek mythology first. And there are a number of ways to do that, with Edith Hamilton's Mythology being a great place to start. So to recap about Pindar's Odes, this is a collection of poetry, of choral songs that celebrated the victories of the men of the games, what we call the Olympic Games. For many of them, you almost forget that there is a human victor, as Pindar just takes you on this journey of stories about the gods. I would strongly suggest that this not be your first foray into Greek literature. You really need to have a foundation to appreciate this one. I missed a ton of the connections. I missed a lot, even with the notes. There are good notes in this version that I read, which is the Penguin Classics. But I would hold off on this one until you feel like you are at the master's degree level of understanding of Greek mythology. For me, I'm probably at the early elementary school aspect. So I need to learn a little more before I read a book like this. But this is a great source for deeper stories about the gods. So if you do have that higher level of Greek mythology knowledge, this would be a fun book for you. Next week, I will be covering Aesop's Fables, and that it should be interesting. And so stay tuned for that. You can subscribe to the podcast to get that. I rarely ask for this, but if you enjoy this podcast, please go and do a rating in Apple or Spotify. That really helps the podcast get up in the search engines and get up in the rankings and that sort of thing. I do want to highlight quickly my company, which is EPR Creations. So Books of Titans, this is a side reading project for me. And I have a company, I own a company called EPR Creations, where I assist universities, small businesses, and health organizations on their online presence. So if you or someone you know is in need of a website, search engine optimization, or online presence consulting, please keep me in mind. That work is what funds this reading project, and that's the best way that you can support this podcast. I do not do basic websites, so I only do complex websites. So please keep that in mind as you're thinking of potential jobs or things that or people that you might know who are in that circumstance. That's going to do it for this episode. Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear from you if you've read Pindar's Odes. Email me at eric@booksoftitans.com and let me know what you thought about the Odes, what something you gathered from it that I missed. I would love to hear about those things. You can also follow Books of Titans on Instagram or Twitter, and you can go to the website booksoftitans.com to find a bunch of reading lists, all my reading lists from 2017 until today, my great books reading list, and all sorts of other resources to help you become a better reader. I'll be back next week with Aesop's Fables. And until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.